Hi, and thanks, Indy, for the kind introduction. Yeah, as Pierre stated, I currently work for Adobe, but as a disclaimer today, it's all about my non-profit activities. So I have a life besides my paid job, which is still focusing on high tech and what I love to do. So yeah, I actually really took some days off to make this trip because technically this is not in my area that my employer gives to me, so they are not sponsoring this talk. So here's my thank you to the From the Front crew, namely Luca, Marco, Rocco, and all the others for inviting me and for having me here today. Let's talk about testing. And by testing, I mean pre- and post-deployment functional testing. I mean the stuff that is necessary to ensure that the work you delivered works, right? Of course, you guys are aware of browser fragmentation and limitations of certain platforms. So with this in mind, crafting anything for consumption using a web browser on any device clearly requires real device testing, which means you have to test your stuff across a wide variety of real devices. Anybody in the room that does not agree? It's difficult to raise your hands, Chris, on a question like that. No, that's fine. Yawning is fine. That's your point. Of course you get, okay. Of course you get tools that can emulate and simulate stuff, right? But they won't never accurately emulate like a frantic cell phone tower that tries to get rid of your connection and tries to kick you out, you know. So you need to go out in the wild and test on real devices, and definitely on more than your personal iPhone or MacBook Pro or whatever costly hardware you just acquired. You need to go beyond your local environment, your lightning fast Wi-Fi, your wide bandwidth you can use on your own. And if we look at the point that Matt Marquis coined, and for those that did not come across Wilto yet, he's a designer working at the Boston Filament Group. He made one point in his 2012 talk, which I really like. The talk is called Interacting Responsibly and Responsively, and I really recommend you looking up that talk and watching the video. You know this kind of stuff, right? Yeah. Laughter, I take laughter as a yes. So, but clearly, as much as we hate this, the hidden meaning of this statement is truly something different. Because the true meaning for the vast majority of people on the planet is this. If you are only testing against your local scenario, your $4,000 gear, please be ensured that is not the real world for most of the consumers of your content. And please realize you're doing it wrong. You definitely should not only develop for yourself, right? I mean, that's not the plan. So you cannot simulate that, or at least not accurately simulate that frantic cell phone tower, except you go out to the wild. You cannot emulate or simulate like an elder device because maybe you don't get your hands on it, who still has an Android 203 phone, and maybe for that specific project, the customer even requests this work you do to be tested against that specific device and operating system combination. And of course, I mean, this is a truckload of work to do to test against all these devices. And besides just that time to be spent, there's the obstacle, as already said, how do you get your hands on the necessary set of devices? And Pierre this morning already mentioned something that you can test yourself here live at the conference at From the Front. And these are so-called open device labs. For those of you that are unfamiliar with that term, ODLs are, yeah, it's a grassroots community idea. Actually, Jeremy opened the first one while not having the idea for it. It's like putting it the right way. But there's also a great recording of a great talk on that. And a lot of people, just like me, thought, I mean, this idea is jumping to my mind. It just makes sense. I take all the devices I have and I share them out publicly for free. And I just invite others to bring their devices and maybe add them to the lab, because it makes sense, you know. The number of open device labs currently, as of today, as of yesterday night, is 124, covering 30 countries, potentially 36 countries, as there are already more than 40 open device labs that might or will open in the near future. These labs share more than 3,500 devices. So there's really no excuse to not test on real devices. Let's look at Italy. There's an ODL in Torino, and there's one in Asti, and one ODL is right here in Bologna. So for those of you who are located in Bologna, it's right next door. And these guys are right next door, right this door. So as soon as you grab lunch over there, just go over there and check out the open device lab we set up for you guys. If you think that map is too empty, by the way, there's this nonprofit I do in my free time, which I founded 2 years ago. We collect best practices, set up as a resources area where you can go to find inspiration and how to do that, how to talk to sponsors, how to acquire free devices. We picked up some lobby work and organized real life meetups of open device lab administrators to exchange knowledge and best practices and that stuff. So to cut it short, if you want to open an ODL, feel free to talk to me after the talk to Andrea out there, talk to Jeremy, talk to us. So what you should have taken away for sure this far in my talk are two things. The first thing is always test your work across real devices. And the second thing is leverage open device labs to do so. Easy peasy, right? It's just super normal. I mean, so easy to do. You got a super design, you got well-crafted code. Of course, you spend days and weeks to test your stuff to ensure the customer has what he paid for, right? So it's a job very well done, right? The problem with that is in most scenarios that is not the case. Since, hey, who's going to pay the rent and the bills? And I mean, the kids need to go to school, and do they really pay you for all that work? Do they get how complicated and how much effort it is? Spending all your precious time in the device lab, testing and optimizing. The problem with that, as always, is your customer. He or she, just allow me to use the mail form for this talk, is not aware of all that operating system, browser quirks, and whatnot. He just does not want to know. And he's right with that, because, I mean, he runs his business case, whatever, selling screws or hotel rooms or building something, engineering, I don't know. But that's not his job to understand, your fraction of that problem, your side of that problem, right? So chances are very high that you actually got confronted with situations like these. Most of you also tried something already, numerous times, to convince customers of the necessity of a testing budget. But if we're really honest, this problem is still omnipresent, right? I mean, if people are looking for a bargain, the first thing, if you get budget cuts or whatever, the first thing asked is QA, right? Nothing has changed with that. I'm in the business for 17 years now, and it has been the same. It has always been like that. it's still like that, even if like conversion rates suffer and people are actually losing money. This situation still stays to be a problem. Why is that? Why is it so difficult to make our customers understand, to deeply convince them of the necessity of proper QA? Why is it so difficult to actually make them request that at us? Plan for it as they spend their fucking ad spends or other operations cost. I believe we must have been doing things wrong in the past. And maybe this is because we only thought about our aspects, the more technical aspects of the whole problem. And I believe there's just no lobby for testing. As in, people just don't have an opinion about that. Clearly, we're sort of stuck here. So let's look over our own plates. Let's look how others are dealing with similar problems. Since, clearly we are not the only business, not the only vertical, not the only people on the planet having to bridge complex technical situations, knowledge to complete noobs, right? Let's look at the car industry. How do they deal with a problem like that? It's a highly regulated market, right? There are others overlooking things, so people trust. Nobody would ever begin to argue with a fraction of the cost of a car that has been put into crash tests. Nobody ever. People do know that crash tests are mandatory to make sure a new car works, right? Everybody in this room knows. You can, if you still if you still don't think, if you're still afraid of something, you can consider auto clubs, for instance, for the assistance and break down statistics of certain brands and all that stuff, before you buy, to make sure you buy something that is stable and hassle-free. You could read reviews by critics, review magazine content on the web, whatever. Stuff that helps you to verify that the product you're up for is good. And in the end, and that's the point, you can always go around and ask for opinions by others, right? You can ask somebody, hey, is that Volvo really a safe car? You own one, tell me. So that's the car industry. Let's look at the airline industry. It is super regulated as well, which adds trust. And definitely, for sure, nobody ever refused to pay the fraction of the cost of an air ticket just because I said, hey, I'm not going to pay for the simulator test you run the pilots through to be, able to carry me home safely, even in the worst situations. Nobody ever did that, right? People know it's necessary. So then you got standards bodies that define rules and look after security and operation safety, as for example, like the FAA in the US. People understand this needs funding, right? And then, in the end, of course, you have the opinion of others, trustees, people you can ask, like, hey, is that airline XYZ safe to fly with, Let's open it up a little bit and look at any high-priced or other technically complex product, right? Like a house, a computer, the hi-fi system, you name it. Very often you find regulated markets here as well, which again gives basic security. There are trusted advisors. Take the example of asking your friend, or somebody in your family, which product is best and what to avoid again. You will get more or less good advice, but you will get advice. Then you have standards bodies, a lot of them, and regulations, like organizations such as the German industry standards organization, DIN or Energy Star or something like that. You get references, to check for. And this adds trust and security from a customer's point of view. And then in the end, you have these opinions again, right? What's the best computer, whatever. Let's look at all your projects. Are you working in a regulated market? That sort of adds trust because of, No. Are trusted advisors available that, actually really have a clue about software development and can bridge the questions of your customers? Nah. Are there code quality clubs? Or standards bodies? Oops. Standards bodies that really care for your specific product or project. Not really. So, and if a customer is looking for opportunities from others, ask somebody on the relevance of testing and quality assurance, and who is able to answer and understand these questions and bridge them to these customers? Boo. Clearly, it took a truckload of time and effort for these industries we looked at before to get going in terms of creating opinions and a certain understanding of their product. So what the hell went wrong in our business? Working this past 2 years for and around the Open Device Lab movement, as people tend to call it, this is really the question that kept me up at night. And I kept asking people on their experience, how they dealt with this situation, what worked and what did not so much. And of course, I have some own experience as well, which I added to these notes. And as Pierre mentioned, I worked myself through all these job layers, from being a QA guy, a developer, a product owner, CEO, whatever, as well as just doing stuff from the customer side. And I tried to just compile it and bring it together to step back and to realize what the actual problem might be. And I plan to go ahead and I do research on that for quite a while. I didn't do for the past 5 months because I was building a house and tried to get advice on that as well and all that stuff. But I'm just picking up again, and it's good to speak to you and to ask you to join in and help me with that. But before we look on that project I'm talking about, let's take a look on how we tend to deal with that problem and what I actually compiled until now. And also, let's try to analyze what went wrong. From all the interviews I did, there are basically 6 things people are popping up with what they do and what they don't, or what they tried in the past. And one thing is that we tend to try to convince people of doing the right thing. Hey, testing is the right thing to do. When we are doing that and people don't get the full scope of it, don't want that, the chances are high that they feel under pressure by us, which is not the best situation to sell something to somebody. And it's actually quite hard to bring QA up to the table with the same customer again when he once put down what you were talking about, including all your full-hearted offers, So clearly that convincing people doesn't help much. Not in the first point. And it can also harm our seriosity and reputation, as it has just never been the best position to be the trusted advisor and the salesman in the same person. Another common reaction of the people I talk to is to simplify stuff. We think it makes it easier to understand if we break the problem down to just a fraction of the whole pile of shit. Let me say, you make the decision to target the top 3 devices in your area, geo area only. And you don't tell your customer. People, that's the worst thing to do. They will say, hey, last time I did that business with that other guy that has been much cheaper, much faster, whatever, in that year. And definitely in the end, you will have to explain again, so when you took something, you took a decision of them, not that good. And even if I would say they don't need to know all of it, I believe customers need to have a basic idea of the scope of the problem. So if you should simplify something, make a decision for your customer, tell them you did. At that point, you don't need to explain why you did, just do so. You did. And actually, some people said this has been a lever to open doors for people to request more information at you and to open a discussion about that. Some of you, and actually I imagine that the truth is that most of us surrender to the problem. We work around the problem by just doing the necessary work, whoever pays or not, because we love the web, we love the product, we love our work, we don't want stuff to break, We also want to make sure that in the next project we don't get a lot of bug reports from the old project. So the lucky ones among you might have sold that fraction of testing effort included in your hourly rate. The not so lucky ones ended up with customers comparing that to others that didn't. And hey, why is it cheaper? Still, in the end, working around that problem does not really solve it. Maybe you even go a step farther and simply refuse to do the job in question, which is, from my point of view, perfectly valid to do. And if you're talking all day to a customer and he or she just doesn't want to understand and think, maybe it's better to refuse to do the job in question. But you are not ducking out before you at least tried something to turn around that rudder, right? I mean, you could also try to ignore the problem and just sit it out, as in not testing, saying, is it my problem the customer doesn't realize and doesn't know it better? This is fair enough, but it comes with hooks. For sure, your customer will run into bugs, or even worse, of course, his customers will run into bugs, and then they will come back to you because you are the one that is blamed for it, and you are in a per definition negative situation. And you are again the guy that needs to explain. Which brings us to education. And I want to take a closer look at that education approach and talk a bit about the roles involved with that. First, of course, we got the customer. Second, there's us, the developer. To understand why trying to educate the customer does fail very often, we have to realize that there is a certain distance in mindset between these two. So I could try now to define this distance using complex algebraic equations or whatnot, but actually a simple comparison does that job pretty well. If we define the customer's mindset to reside on planet Earth, the developer's vision lives on Delvos Prime. And as you all know, Delvos Prime is the location of a Federation long-term care center, which actually draws some nice analogies to our topic here, especially post-deployment testing. So you don't know Delvos Prime, right? No. It appeared in Time's Orphan, which is episode 24 of season 6 of Deep Space Nine, which aired first on May 20, 1998. As you probably know, beloved Keiko O'Brien had a guest appearance in this episode, just as our Chief of Operations daughter, Molly O'Brien, which at that age was played by Hannah Hate. What? You didn't know that? This, people, is exactly how your customers feel when you talk about browser fragmentation. See? This is, sort of the gist of the problem. So how in hell do we raise awareness without blowing any minds? Without scaring the shit out of people? Without losing trust or interest in working with you? By just getting too complicated, too nerdish. I believe we have to create a common opinion about the problem. And in a perfect world, of course, like an opinion would base upon knowledge. Like, in our world, an opinion is easily based on something like whatever Justin Bieber tweeted drunk or so. What I believe in the end, the goal should be is to create materials that can be referred to. So you guys are not the culprit. And in the same moment, it is clear that you are referring to common sense, to best practices, to industry standards, and so on, right? It takes you out of the shooting line. And B, ideally, these tools or this content distributes themselves as in viral assets that help to create an opinion. I mean, because this is like how shit works today. Imagine yourself in a queue at the airport. You're like, oh wait, we're in Italy. You guys don't queue, right? Okay. Let me start again. Imagine yourself in that mob of people trying, hey, me first, at the airport, and you're like flying domestic to some business meeting, and you observe two Thai guys like speaking, and one guy is saying like, hey, that new checkout process we just implemented, that we optimized our processes and now we get like 20% more conversions. And the other guy said, yeah, and did you say that funny YouTube video about the guys that didn't get the point about that? And you both are laughing. And just like, what? YouTube video about that? That's interesting. But this is how stuff works, This is how opinions are created. So that would be an ideal, like create a 1-minute video that explains the situation, and then it pops around at these business people, namely our customers, to like solve that problem for us. It takes some effort, some initial creativity, and some spirit and some will to do for free. But then imagine all the redundant explanations and all that pain you're going through is taken off you. Let's take a look at one example of how such a video could look.
Peter, come take a look at this.
Mr. Daniels.
Mr. Daniels.
Look at this.
What's this? The numbers, they keep getting bigger and bigger.
The clicks are off the charts.
Yeah.
Yoshi, it's Walter. We're back.
Yes, sir!
I need more trees. More trees? I'll get you more trees.
Hey, take a look at wood pulp.
Everything you got on wood pulp right now.
He really loves that thing.
This is what I'm talking about. This is 60 seconds to explain a complete noob about a complex technological situation. You don't have to be an expert at all to have an opinion about that right now. And we can do that as well for our problem. I'm convinced of that because with that Open Device Lab thing, we did something quite comparable, even if it uses an even lighter meta level, as I would put it. In January, LabUp rolled out DYDD, which stands for Donate Your Dusty Device, with a worldwide effort to in informing the media with a press report, of course, where to donate your dusty, old, used device you just got replaced over Christmas. And we targeted the world, as in we targeted everybody, not technology focused or so. So this was not going out in Smashing Magazine. This was going out in New York Times. And we did that because, besides generating device donations, we were after raising awareness for this complexity I'm talking about, without many words. So let's take a look at that landing page. The first impression is, wow, so many devices needed to do that job, right? The video basically does the rest of the storytelling. So what is happening when quality assurance across real devices is happening? And with that, we just offer education on testing, right? And we end that with a clear call to action. Like step 1, in that first step, select the open device lab you like and you like to donate to. And also learn how many of them are around. So it must be common sense, right? Then label your parcel, do something, And of course, we have that feel-good button, which then leads you to some social media action to spread the word about your generosity, right? So the URL for that is opendevicelab.com DYDD. All in the room, please help us to spread the word about that. When my timing is nearly right, no, it won't be like in 4 minutes because I still first started a bit late and then finished a bit early, so my scheduled tweets are completely off, but you'll find it in the timeline of the event as well. You can also shout it out of the window to the street, or just remember when somebody steps up to you and brags with hey, look at my new iPhone 6 Plus Plus or whatever. Ask him or her, what did you do with the old one? Just Google or Bing or whatever, donate your dusty device, and you'll find it. Back to the plan. My idea is to join forces to create assets that could be referred to as common sense. Imagine you can just include something in your quotation as this. For more information, refer to why test. You'd instantly kill any discussion about the necessity of that position in your offer when people are directed to content that clearly holds the mirror to their own faces, It's they will most likely ask you hey, that's interesting, can we talk about that? So that's where we want to be, right? So here's my take. Let's build that stuff together. Let's join forces and create the ultimate guide, as I phrased it earlier this year, to educate and convince, but also be able to ignore and having worked around our uninformed customers together. Because they really don't need to get it in full. They just need to want it. With that, have an awesome remaining from the front.